Captain Vex stared at his control screen and rubbed his tired eyes with his clawed hands. 3 years of patrol duty along the Outer Rim had made him slow and bored. His ship, the Star Dancer, moved through empty space like a lazy fish swimming in calm water. The Altria merchant fleet paid him well to watch for pirates and smugglers, but most days he saw nothing but stars and darkness. His crew of 12 aliens from different worlds shared his boredom. They played cards in the mess hall and complained about the food. Some slept through their shifts. Others stared out the windows at the same empty void they had seen yesterday and the day before that. The war between the Krell Empire and the Zephyrin Republic had ended 2 years ago, and trade was good again, but out here on the edge of known space, nothing ever happened. The calm Officer Pip looked up from her station with sleepy eyes. She was a Quillen with soft gray fur and large ears that drooped when she was tired. Her people were known for their excellent hearing, but even she had little to listen to these days. The old trade routes buzzed with chatter from merchant ships and passenger liners, but the rim sectors stayed quiet as a tomb. Vex remembered when things were different. 5 years ago, human ships would pass through these sectors on their way to explore new systems. They were curious creatures, always poking their small noses into places other species avoided. The humans asked strange questions and made odd jokes that only they seemed to understand. Their ships were simple and their technology was basic, but they had something that impressed even the proudest alien races. They never gave up. Then 3 years ago, the humans just stopped coming. Their last message to the Galactic Trade Confederation was short and simple. They said they were busy with important research and would contact everyone when they were ready. No one worried much at first. Humans were known for getting lost in their work. But months passed, and then a whole year, and still no word from human space. The Confederation sent ships to check on them, but found the borders of human territory sealed with automated defense platforms. The machines would not let anyone pass, and they gave the same message over and over. The Sol Consortium was conducting vital research and required complete isolation. Any attempt to force entry would be considered an act of war. The platforms were clearly human design, but they used weapons technology that made the Confederation fleets turn around and leave. Some alien politicians said the humans had finally shown their true nature. They claimed humans were secretly building weapons to conquer the galaxy. Others laughed and said humans were probably just embarrassed about some failed experiment. A few wise voices suggested that humans might be facing some crisis they could not handle alone, but when the Confederation offered help to border platforms, simply repeated their warning. As time passed, the galaxy learned to live without humans. Trade routes shifted around human space. The territories that humans had been exploring were claimed by other species. The ambitious races that had once watched humanity with worry now barely remembered they existed. Life went on and the galaxy prospered without the strange bipedal mammals from Sol. Vex had been one of the few who missed them. Humans bought things that other species ignored. They were good customers who paid on time and never tried to cheat honest merchants. They also told the best stories around spaceport bars. No other species could spin tales of adventure and heroism the way humans could. Their fiction was wild and impossible, but somehow always made sense in the end. Now he flew patrol in sectors that had once seen human exploration ships every few months. The silence felt wrong to him, but he could not explain why. His captain training told him that empty space was safer than crowded space. Fewer ships meant fewer problems. But some deep instinct warned him that the quiet was not natural. His thoughts were broken by a sudden beeping from the sensor station. The young Korathi male working there looked confused and worried. He was new to deep space work and still jumped at every unusual reading. His name was Zik, and he had only been with the crew for 6 months. Zik called out with excitement in his voice. He said the sensors were detecting something impossible. A hyperspace exit signature was forming right in front of them, but there had been no approach warning. Ships in hyperspace always broadcast their exit vector to avoid collisions. The signature was also wrong somehow. It was too clean and too bright, like someone had perfected the science of faster than light travel. Vex felt his heart start beating faster as he moved to the sensor station. The main screen showed a growing distortion in space that hurt to look at directly. Whatever was coming out of hyperspace was big, and it was using technology that his instruments could barely detect. The energy readings were off the scale, and the hyperspace wake was unlike anything in Confederation databases. The distortion reached its peak, and reality seemed to tear open like fabric. Space itself bent and twisted in ways that made Vex feel dizzy. His crew stopped what they were doing and stared at the main screen with wide eyes and open mouths. Even the oldest veterans among them had never seen a hyperspace exit like this one. Then it was over, and a ship hung in space before them. Vex felt his breath catch in his throat as he tried to process what he was seeing. The vessel was clearly of human design, but unlike any human ship he had ever encountered. Where human ships were usually round and friendly, looking, this one was all sharp angles and dark surfaces. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and its hull had an organic quality that made it look almost alive. The ship was smaller than a Confederation battleship, but larger than most merchant vessels. Its shape reminded Vex of some deep-sea predator from his home world, sleek and dangerous with no wasted space or decorative elements. Every line of its design suggested speed and power. Weapons ports were visible along its flanks, but they were integrated so smoothly into the hull that they looked like natural features. Pip suddenly sat up straight at her communication station. Her large ears were twitching with excitement as she turned to face Vex. She said the human ship was broadcasting on all standard frequencies, but the message was unlike anything she had heard from humans before. Their voices usually carried warmth and humor, even in formal situations. This transmission was cold and precise like a machine trying to sound human. The message began to play through the bridge speakers. The voice was male and spoke perfect galactic standard, but there was something different about it. The words were human, but the tone was not quite right. It carried authority that human voices had never possessed before. The speaker identified himself as a commander of a vessel called JÖRMUNGANDR and requested immediate contact with Confederation leadership. Vex felt a chill run down his spine at the name. His species had studied human mythology as part of trade relations training. JÖRMUNGAND was the name of a great serpent from human legends, a monster that would one day devour the world. It seemed like a strange name for a human ship, but then humans had always chosen odd names for their vessels. The transmission continued with a request for safe passage to the nearest Confederation station. The human said time was of critical importance, and that he brought greetings from something called the Sol Consortium. Vex had never heard that name before. The last human government he knew about was called the United Earth Federation. Perhaps things had changed during their 3 years of silence. The message ended with coordinates for a meeting point and a polite, but firm statement that the JÖRMUNGAND would wait exactly 1 standard hour for response. After that time, they would proceed to Nexus Prime Station with or without escort. The transmission cut off, and the alien ship hung motionless in space like a patient predator. Vex looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were all staring at him, waiting for orders, but he had no idea what to do. This was far beyond his authority as a merchant patrol captain. The return of humanity after 3 years of silence was a matter for the highest levels of Confederation government. The fact that they had returned with impossible technology and a ship that looked like it belonged in a nightmare made things even more complicated. He ordered Pip to send an urgent message to Confederation headquarters on Nexus Prime. The message included all sensor data from the JÖRMUNGANDR appearance and a full recording of the human transmission. He marked it as Priority Alpha and requested immediate instructions. Then he settled back in his captain's chair to wait and watched the mysterious human ship that had appeared from nowhere. The JÖRMUNGANDR made no aggressive moves, but its very presence felt like a threat. It simply waited in the darkness of space while its hull seemed to shift and flow in ways that made Vex question his own eyes. Whatever the humans had been doing during their 3 years of silence had changed him in ways that made his alien instinct scream danger. The galaxy was about to discover that the quiet species from Sol had become something very different indeed. The emergency session alarm echoed through the halls of Nexus Prime like the cry of a dying star. Ambassador Cora of the Veltian Republic had never heard the call before in her 20 years of diplomatic service. The massive space station that served as the neutral meeting ground for the Galactic Trade Confederation rarely saw anything more exciting than trade disputes and border negotiations. Now every species representative was rushing through the corridors with expressions of confusion and worry. The main council chamber filled quickly as delegates from 47 different worlds took their seats. The circular room with its high domed ceiling had been designed to make every species feel equal and welcome. Soft lighting and comfortable atmosphere controls created a sense of peace and cooperation. Today, that peace felt fragile as nervous chatter filled the air in dozens of different languages. Chancellor Brix of the Karathi Federation called the session to order with his deep, booming voice. He was an impressive figure even by alien standards, with his towering height and ceremonial robes that sparkled with embedded crystals. His people were known throughout the galaxy for their diplomatic skills and their ability to find peaceful solutions to difficult problems. The worry lines on his broad face suggested this problem might be beyond even his considerable talents. He began by sharing the report from Captain Vex and the sensor data from a merchant patrol ship. The holographic displays showed the impossible hyperspace exit and the strange human vessel that had emerged from it. Several delegates gasped when they saw the JÖRMUNGANDR hanging in space like a living shadow. The ship looked nothing like the friendly human vessels they remembered from years past. The Zephyrian trade minister stood up and demanded to know why they were wasting time on one human ship. Her people were natural merchants who valued efficiency above all else. She pointed out that humans had chosen to isolate themselves and the galaxy had prospered without them. If they wanted to return to galactic society, they should follow proper diplomatic channels instead of making dramatic appearances in empty space. Several other delegates nodded in agreement, but their confident words died away when Chancellor Brix played the audio transmission from the JÖRMUNGANDR. The cold, precise voice that claimed to represent the Sol Consortium sent chills through the assembled aliens. Even species that had no natural fear response felt something primitive and ancient stirring in the back of their minds when they heard that voice. The debate might have continued for hours, but the chamber doors suddenly opened with a soft hiss. Every head turned to watch as a figure in black walked into the room with measured steps. The delegates fell silent as they tried to process what they were seeing. The newcomer was clearly human, but unlike any human they had encountered before. Commander Jake Rivers stood just under 6 feet tall with brown hair and blue eyes that seemed to hold depths no living being should possess. His uniform was made of some material that shifted between solid black and liquid darkness as he moved. The fabric seemed alive and responsive to his thoughts and emotions. Most disturbing of all was the way he carried himself with absolute confidence and authority that made even the proudest alien representatives feel small and uncertain. He walked to the center of the chamber and stood beneath the great seal of the Confederation without asking permission or waiting for an invitation to speak. His eyes swept the room, taking in every face and every reaction with the calculating gaze of a predator studying its prey. When he finally spoke, his voice carried easily to every corner of the vast space without any electronic amplification. Rivers began with a simple greeting, but his words carried weight that made the air itself seem heavier. He thanked the Confederation for agreeing to meet with him on such short notice and apologized for the dramatic nature of his arrival. He explained that humanity had been forced to take extreme measures to prepare for a threat that endangered not just their own species, but every form of intelligent life in the galaxy. The Altrian defense minister interrupted with a sharp question about human isolation and the weapons platforms guarding their territory. She was a veteran of 3 wars and not easily impressed by mysterious arrivals or cryptic warnings. Her scarred face and missing arm bore testimony to her experience with real danger, and she demanded clear answers about human intentions. Rivers nodded as if he had expected the challenge and gestured with one hand. The air above the chamber floor shimmered and suddenly filled with holographic images that made several delegates cry out in shock and fear. The displays showed massive structures drifting in the darkness between galaxies like sleeping giants waiting to wake. Each structure was larger than a moon and covered with surfaces that hurt to look at directly. The images showed cities that existed in impossible geometries and machines that seemed to operate on principles that violated every known law of physics. Worst of all were the creatures that move among the structures. They were not quite solid and not quite energy, but something that existed in the spaces between normal reality. Looking at them made the delegates feel sick and dizzy as their minds tried to process things that should not exist. Rivers explained that these images came from deep space probes that humanity had sent beyond the galactic rim 3 years ago. The probes had discovered evidence of an ancient intelligence that had been dormant for millions of years, but was now beginning to stir. He called them the Devourers and said they represented a threat that had destroyed countless civilizations throughout cosmic history. The Quillen science advisor stood on shaking legs and demanded proof of these wild claims. Her people were logical and methodical and did not believe in monsters from ancient legends. She pointed out that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and that humans were known for their overactive imaginations and tendency toward dramatic storytelling. River smiled for the first time since entering the chamber, but the expression held no warmth or humor. He gestured again, and the holographic displays changed to show star charts spanning millions of years of galactic history. The chart showed the rise and fall of great civilizations in regular cycles that repeated every few million years. Each cycle ended the same way, with entire species vanishing without trace or explanation. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Pattern after pattern showed the same story, repeating across cosmic time. Advanced civilizations would reach their peak, and then simply disappear, leaving behind only empty worlds and silent ruins. The gaps in galactic history that scholars had always attributed to natural disasters or internal conflicts suddenly took on a much more sinister meaning. Rivers continued his presentation by explaining that humanity had spent 3 years studying the ruins of these vanished civilizations and learning from their final desperate messages. The survivors who had managed to leave warnings all spoke of the same enemy, an intelligence from outside normal space and time that viewed all other forms of consciousness as food to be consumed and resources to be harvested. The chamber erupted in frightened voices as delegates tried to process the implications of what they were hearing. Species that had been enemies for centuries suddenly found themselves united by a common terror. The petty political disputes and trade conflicts that had seemed so important just hours ago now appeared trivial in the face of an existential threat to all intelligent life. Chancellor Brix used his authority to restore order, but his voice shook as he asked a question that everyone was thinking. If this threat was real and as powerful as Rivers claimed, then what could any of them do to stop it? The combined fleets of the entire Confederation would be meaningless against enemies that could destroy civilizations that had existed for millions of years. Rivers waited for complete silence before answering. He said that humanity had found evidence that some species had survived previous encounters with the Devourers. The survivors had all undergone radical changes that allowed them to fight enemies that existed partially outside normal reality. They had adapted and evolved in ways that transformed them into something that could resist consumption and corruption. The human commander gestured once more, and the holographic displays showed images of the JÖRMUNGANDR and similar vessels moving through space with impossible grace and speed. The ships seemed to flow like living things, and their hulls rippled with patterns that suggested biological rather than mechanical construction. Weapons fired from the vessels bent space itself and created effects that looked more like magic than technology. Rivers explained that humanity had learned to integrate organic and mechanical systems in ways that created new forms of consciousness. Human pilots could merge with their ships, and human crews could share thoughts and reactions across vast distances. The process changed them in fundamental ways, but also gave them abilities that conventional technology could never match. The Valerian war chief stood up with his hand on his ceremonial sword and declared that his people would never submit to such unnatural changes. His species prized individual strength and honor above all else, and the idea of merging with machines was an abomination to everything they believed. He spoke for many in the chamber who viewed the human transformation with disgust and suspicion. Rivers studied the war chief with those unsettling blue eyes and nodded with understanding. He said that every species would have to make their own choice about how to face the coming threat. Humanity was offering to share what they had learned, but they would not force their solutions on anyone. The galaxy would stand or fall based on the decisions made by each individual world and each individual leader. The chamber fell silent as the full weight of the choice settled on every delegate. They could reject human help and face the Devourers with conventional weapons and traditional thinking. They could accept human assistance and undergo changes that would make them something other than what they had always been. Or they could try to find some third option that might preserve both their lives and their nature. Rivers concluded his presentation by saying that the Devourers were already stirring in the spaces between galaxies. Ancient signals were being detected from the galactic core, and long-dormant installations were beginning to activate across known space. The galaxy had perhaps 50 years before the first wave of attackers arrived, and much less time to prepare adequate defenses. He turned to leave the chamber, but paused at the doors to deliver one final message. The JÖRMUNGANDR will remain at Nexus Prime for 7 days to answer questions and provide additional evidence to any delegates who requested it. After that time, humanity would begin implementing their own defense plans with or without Confederation support. The choice belonged to the galaxy, but the clock was already ticking toward an appointment with extinction. General Hax of the Confederation Defense Force stood in the observation deck of Nexus Prime and watched the human ship through reinforced viewing windows. The JÖRMUNGANDR floated in space like a dark omen, and its very presence made his military instincts scream warnings. His 40 years of combat experience across a dozen different wars had taught him to recognize real threats, and this human vessel radiated danger in ways that conventional weapons never could. 3 days had passed since Commander Rivers delivered his shocking presentation to the Council, and the station buzzed with frantic activity. Diplomatic messages flew between worlds as governments tried to decide how to respond to the human warnings. Some species were already mobilizing their fleets, while others dismissed the entire story as human deception designed to gain political advantage. Hax had seen the holographic evidence and read the detailed reports that Rivers provided to military leaders. The documentation was thorough and convincing, but it described threats that seemed more like nightmare fiction than military intelligence. Ancient enemies that existed partially outside normal reality and consumed entire civilizations were concepts that challenged everything he understood about warfare and tactics. The general turned away from the window as Admiral Foster approached with measured steps. The human military leader moved with the same unsettling confidence that Rivers displayed, but his manner was more approachable and friendly. Foster wore a uniform similar to Rivers, but his version seemed slightly less alien and more recognizably human in its basic design. Foster greeted Hax with a respectful nod and suggested they discuss the practical aspects of the human defensive preparations. The Admiral explained that talking about abstract threats was less useful than demonstrating concrete solutions. He had brought several examples of integrated human technology and offered to show Confederation military leaders exactly what humanity had developed during their 3 years of isolation. The two officers made their way to Docking Bay 7, where a small human fighter craft waited for inspection. The vessel was unlike anything in Confederation databases, with its smooth organic curves and dark metallic surface that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. Technical specialists from 6 different species surrounded the craft with scanning equipment, but their instruments gave confusing and contradictory readings. Foster introduced the pilot as Kate Miller, and Hax felt his assumptions about human military personnel crumble. Miller appeared to be in her early 20s with short blonde hair and green eyes that held the same unsettling depth he had seen in other transformed humans. She wore a form-fitting flight suit that seemed to merge seamlessly with her skin at the wrists and neck. Miller spoke with enthusiasm about the capabilities of her fighter, but her words described impossible things. She claimed the craft could accelerate at rates that should liquefy any organic pilot and turn in directions that violated basic physics. The weapon system supposedly manipulated space itself rather than firing conventional projectiles or energy beams. Most disturbing of all was her casual mention of merging consciousness with the ship during combat operations. Hax demanded a practical demonstration, and Foster agreed with a smile that suggested he had been expecting the request. The human admiral arranged for a mock combat exercise in the testing range near Nexus Prime, where military vessels could practice maneuvers without endangering civilian traffic. 3 of the Confederation's best fighter pilots volunteered to participate in simulated combat against the human craft. The Confederation pilots flew advanced interceptor fighters that represented the peak of current military technology. Their ships were fast and heavily armed with veteran crews who had survived real combat against pirates and raiders. They approached the exercise with confidence born of years of successful missions and superior equipment. Kate Miller launched from the docking bay in her organic-looking fighter and immediately began maneuvers that made the watching officers question their own eyes. The human craft moved through space with fluid grace that reminded Hax of watching a fish swim through water. It rolled and twisted in patterns that should have been impossible for any mechanical device. The mock combat began with the Confederation fighters using standard attack formations and proven tactics. Their first coordinated assault should have overwhelmed any single opponent through superior numbers and firepower. Instead, Miller's fighters seemed to anticipate their moves before they made them and flowed around their attacks like smoke, avoiding grasping hands. The human pilot's voice came across the communication channels, and she sounded perfectly calm despite pulling maneuvers that should have knocked her unconscious. She offered gentle suggestions to her opponents and pointed out weaknesses in their formations with the patience of an instructor teaching eager students. Her tone remained friendly even as she systematically dismantled their best efforts to score simulated hits. The demonstration continued for 30 minutes and ended with all 3 Confederation fighters marked as destroyed, while Miller's craft showed no damage at all. The human pilot had won the engagement so completely that it barely qualified as a contest. More disturbing than her victory was the casual ease with which she had achieved it. After the exercise, Miller brought her fighter back to the docking bay and emerged from the cockpit without any sign of stress or fatigue. The maneuver she had performed should have left her barely conscious from acceleration forces, but she appeared refreshed and alert. Medical scanners showed her vital signs were completely normal despite experiencing forces that should have been lethal. Foster led the group of military observers to a briefing room where Miller explained the principles behind integrated flight systems. She described the process of mental linking with ship computers and the way consciousness could expand to encompass mechanical systems. Her words painted a picture of human and machine working together in ways that transcended traditional boundaries between organic and artificial intelligence. The young pilot admitted that the integration process changed people in fundamental ways. She said that merged pilots could feel the flow of space around their ships and sense the intentions of enemy vessels before they acted. Combat became less about reaction time and more about understanding the deeper patterns that govern all movement and conflict. General Hacks interrupted with blunt questions about the costs and risks of the integration process. His experience had taught him that powerful new weapons always came with hidden dangers and unintended consequences. He wanted to know what humanity had sacrificed to gain these abilities, and whether the price was worth paying. Miller's expression grew serious as she considered how to answer. She explained that integrated humans remained fundamentally human, but gained access to ways of thinking and perceiving that normal consciousness could not reach. The process was irreversible and changed how pilots related to both technology and other people. Some found the experience liberating, while others struggled with the loss of purely individual identity. The technical specialists who had been examining Miller's fighter presented their preliminary findings to the assembled officers. Their scans had detected biological components integrated throughout the ship's structure, but the technology was so advanced that they could not determine how it functioned. The vessel seemed to be part machine and part living organism in ways that challenged their understanding of both engineering and biology. Foster suggested that the observers might benefit from seeing larger-scale examples of human integration technology. He transmitted authorization codes to the JÖRMUNGANDR, and moments later the observation windows showed the massive human ship beginning to change. Hull plates shifted and flowed like liquid metal, while new structures emerged from hidden compartments. The transformation continued for several minutes as the JÖRMUNGANDR revealed capabilities that had been concealed during its initial arrival. Weapon systems extended from the hull like predatory claws, while sensor arrays unfolded with organic grace. The ship's outline changed from merely threatening to actively hostile as systems came online that made nearby space itself seem to bend and twist. More shocking than the physical changes was the way the ship seemed to become aware of its observers. Sensor sweeps from the JÖRMUNGANDR focused on the station's observation deck with precision that suggested conscious attention rather than automated scanning. The human vessel was not just a machine operated by a crew, but something that possessed its own form of intelligence and awareness. Foster explained that capital ships like the JÖRMUNGANDR represented the most complete integration of human and artificial consciousness. The vessels were crewed by volunteers who had accepted permanent merger with ship systems in exchange for capabilities that conventional crews could never match. The boundary between human and machine had been erased in favor of something entirely new. The demonstration concluded with the JÖRMUNGANDR returning to its passive configuration, but the memory of what the observers had witnessed will remain with them forever. The human ship had revealed itself as something beyond current understanding of military technology. It was alive in ways that made traditional concepts of weapons and vessels seem primitive and inadequate. General Hax found himself facing a decision that would affect the future of galactic civilization. The humans offered to share their integration technology with other species, but the price was accepting fundamental changes to the nature of consciousness itself. Military leaders would have to choose between conventional forces that might prove useless against the coming threat or accepting transformation that would make them something other than what they had always been. The Confederation's top scientists were already requesting permission to study human integration technology, and several military academies wanted to begin training programs for volunteer pilots. Other leaders warned that accepting human help might be more dangerous than facing mysterious devourers with traditional weapons and tactics. Foster left the military observers with detailed technical specifications and training manuals for basic integration procedures. He made it clear that humanity would prepare to help any species that chose to adopt their methods, but they would not pressure anyone to make decisions they were not ready for. The choice belonged to each individual world and each individual leader. As the human admiral departed, Hax realized that the galaxy stood at a crossroads that would determine the fate of all intelligent life. The old ways of thinking about war and survival were about to become obsolete. Species that adapted to the new reality might survive what was coming, while those that clung to traditional methods would likely face extinction. The JÖRMUNGANDR waited patiently in space near Nexus Prime, like a dark prophet offering salvation at a price that few were prepared to pay. Time was running out for the galaxy to make its choice, and the consequences of that decision would echo through the cosmos for generations to come. Captain Lisa Stone of the Confederation flagship Victory stood on her bridge and watched the emergency beacon flash red on her main screen. The signal came from the Purser's arm monitoring station, Deep Watch 7, which had gone silent 12 hours ago. Her orders were simple but terrifying. Investigate the loss of contact and determine what had happened to the 130 scientists and technicians stationed there. The Victory led a fleet of 8 ships toward the last known position of Deep Watch 7. 3 heavy cruisers and 4 destroyers accompanied Stone's flagship, while mysterious human vessel JÖRMUNGAND followed at a respectful distance. Commander Rivers had requested permission to observe the rescue mission, and the Confederation leadership had reluctantly agreed despite protests from several member species. Stone had been serving in the Confederation Navy for 15 years and commanded rescue operations across half the galaxy. She had seen ships destroyed by pirates and stations damaged by equipment failures, but something about this mission felt different. The final transmission from Deep Watch 7 had lasted only 17 seconds and consisted mostly of screaming static punctuated by words that made no sense. The monitoring station had been studying unusual energy readings from the galactic core when contact was lost. Deep Watch 7 was one of 12 early warning stations positioned around the rim of known space to detect threats before they could reach populated systems. The station's crew were experienced professionals who would not panic easily or abandon their posts without good reason. As the fleet approached the coordinates where Deep Watch 7 should have been Stone, felt a growing unease that had nothing to do with normal pre-mission nerves. Her sensors showed nothing but empty space where the massive monitoring station was supposed to be. No debris field from an explosion, and no energy signatures from damaged equipment. The station had simply vanished, as if it had never existed at all. The tactical officer reported finding traces of exotic particles that did not match any known weapon signatures. The readings made no sense according to conventional physics, and seemed to suggest that space itself had been damaged in some fundamental way. Scanner sweeps detected areas where reality appeared to be slightly out of focus, as if someone had smeared the fabric of existence with their thumb. Stone ordered the fleet to maintain defensive positions while they investigated the anomaly, but her instruments began displaying impossible readings. Space in the area where Deep Watch 7 had been located was showing signs of severe distortion. Gravity fields fluctuated wildly and electromagnetic readings spiked into ranges that should have been physically impossible. Then the distortion began to grow, and Stone realized with horror that they were witnessing something beyond her understanding of military threats. The area of twisted space expanded outward like ripples on a pond, but these ripples bent light and warped matter in ways that hurt to observe directly. Her crew started reporting headaches and nausea from looking at the scanner displays too long. The chief science officer, Dr. Quinn, tried to explain what the sensors were detecting, but his words came out in stammers and half-finished sentences. He described energy patterns that existed in dimensions beyond normal space and mathematical equations that produced results that could not be true. The distortion was not just destroying matter, but somehow editing it out of existence entirely. Stone had faced enemy fleets and stellar phenomena that could destroy entire worlds, but this was different. The growing anomaly felt malevolent in ways that simple natural disasters never could. It seemed to possess a hungry intelligence that viewed her ships and crew as potential meals rather than obstacles to overcome. The JÖRMUNGANDR suddenly accelerated toward the expanding distortion without any warning or explanation. Stone opened communication channels and demanded to know what Commander Rivers was planning, but received no immediate response. The human ship plunged directly into the area of twisted space that her own vessels were carefully avoiding. Stone watched in fascination and terror as the JÖRMUNGANDR entered the distortion field and immediately began to change. The ship's hull rippled and flowed like liquid, while new structures emerged from hidden compartments. Weapon systems activated that created visible tears in the fabric of space itself, and the vessel seemed to become partially transparent, as if it existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The battle that followed challenged everything Stone thought she knew about space combat. Rivers and his crew were fighting an enemy that could not be clearly seen or properly understood. Scanner readings showed massive shapes moving through distortion, but they appeared and disappeared randomly, as if they were not entirely present in normal reality. The JÖRMUNGANDR fired weapons that bent space around their targets and created explosions that existed in colors the human eye was never meant to see. Enemy return fire consisted of beams that seemed to unravel the basic structure of matter, while projectiles passed through normal space by taking shortcuts through dimensions that did not officially exist. Stone tried to order her fleet to assist the human ship, but discovered that conventional weapons were useless against targets that could phase in and out of reality at will. Energy beams passed harmlessly through enemies that were only partially present, while missile impacts had no effect on creatures that existed mostly in mathematical concepts rather than physical form. The battle raged for 17 minutes that felt like hours to the watching Confederation crews. The JÖRMUNGANDR fought alone against forces that defied description, while Stone and her captains could only observe and try to understand what they were witnessing. The human ship moved through impossible maneuvers and fired weapons that seemed to violate every known law of physics. Then suddenly everything stopped and the distortion field began to collapse inward on itself. The twisted areas of space snapped back to normal like rubber bands returning to their original shape, while the malevolent presence that had been growing stronger simply vanished. The JÖRMUNGANDR emerged from the fading anomaly with its hull scarred by energies that left marks in dimensions beyond the purely physical. Stone immediately opened communications with the human ship and demanded a full report on what had just occurred. Rivers responded in his calm, precise voice, but she could hear exhaustion underneath his professional manner. He explained that the fleet had encountered an advance scout from the Devourers that had been testing the galaxy's defenses and preparing the way for larger forces. The human commander described the enemy as existing partially outside normal space and time, which made them nearly impossible to fight with conventional weapons. The creatures fed on consciousness itself and could consume entire civilizations by draining the life force from every thinking being in their path. Only beings who had learned to exist partially outside normal reality could effectively resist their attacks. Stone asked about the missing monitoring station, and Rivers confirmed that Deep Watch 7 and its entire crew had been consumed by the enemy scout. The station had not been destroyed in any conventional sense, but rather edited out of existence, along with everyone aboard. The Devourers did not simply kill their victims, but erased them so completely that they had never existed at all. The implications of what Stone had witnessed sent shock waves through the Confederation fleet. If the enemy could simply delete space stations and their crews from reality, then no conventional defense would be adequate. Traditional military thinking became meaningless when facing opponents that operated by rules that made no logical sense. Rivers transmitted detailed combat logs from the engagement to Stone's flagship, and the data confirmed her worst fears. The JÖRMUNGANDR had barely managed to defeat a single enemy scout and had sustained damage that would take weeks to repair. The full invasion force would consist of thousands of such creatures backed by technology that existed beyond current understanding. The rescue mission returned to Nexus Prime with grim news and sensor recordings that terrified even the most experienced military analysts. The evidence was undeniable that the galaxy faced a threat beyond anything in recorded history. Species that had dismissed human warnings as paranoid fantasy were forced to confront the reality of enemies that could edit their existence out of the universe. Stone found herself in the uncomfortable position of having to explain to Confederation leadership that their most advanced military technology was essentially useless against the coming invasion. The weapons and tactics that served them well in conflicts between galactic species were primitive tools when facing enemies that operated outside the normal rules of reality. The human demonstration had provided definitive proof that integration technology was not just an advantage but a requirement for survival. Species that refused to accept fundamental changes to their nature would be consumed just as completely as the crew of Deep Watch 7. The choice was no longer between remaining the same or becoming something different, but between evolution and extinction. Commander Rivers addressed the emergency session of military leaders with footage from the battle that made even veteran officers sick to their stomachs. He explained that the enemy scout had been relatively weak and that the main invasion force would consist of creatures that made the Perseus Arm incident look like a minor skirmish. The galaxy had perhaps 50 years before the first major wave of Devourers arrived, but much less time to prepare adequate defenses. Every day spent debating the merits of integration technology was a day lost in the race to transform enough of the galactic population to mount an effective resistance. Stone left the briefing session with orders to begin implementing emergency protocols throughout the Confederation fleet. Military academies would start training volunteers in basic integration procedures, while research teams worked to understand and adapt human technology. The old galaxy was ending whether anyone wanted it to or not, and the new one would be shaped by creatures that had learned to exist beyond the boundaries of normal reality. The JÖRMUNGANDR waited in dock for repairs while its crew prepared for the larger battles to come. Stone realized that the mysterious human ship represented either salvation or damnation for galactic civilization. The only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same again. The final session of the Galactic Trade Confederation would be remembered as the day an entire galaxy chose its future. Representatives from 63 worlds gathered in the Great Chamber of Nexus Prime, while their home governments waited for news that would determine whether their species would survive the coming darkness. The debate had lasted for 3 weeks since the Perseus Arm incident, and time was running out for any decision at all. Chancellor Brick stood before the assembled delegates with the weight of cosmic history on his shoulders. His normally confident demeanor had been shaken by reports from Deep Watch 7 and the undeniable evidence that conventional military forces were useless against a Devourer threat. The sensor recordings from Captain Stone's fleet showed enemies that existed beyond normal understanding and consumed entire installations without leaving any trace behind. The chamber was divided into 3 distinct groups that reflected the impossible choice facing galactic civilization. The purists, led by the Valerian War Chief, refused to accept any form of integration technology and insisted they would rather die as themselves and live as something else. The integrationists, pushed by the Pragmatic Merchant Guild, demanded immediate implementation of human transformation procedures to save as many lives as possible. Between them sat the undecided, who represented nearly half the galaxy's population and could not bring themselves to choose either path. Commander Rivers entered the chamber for what everyone knew would be his final address to the Confederation. His appearance had changed subtly over the past weeks as the integration process continued to evolve within him. His eyes now held depths that seemed to contain entire universes, while his movements carried a fluid grace that suggested he was no longer entirely bound by normal physical laws. The human commander began by acknowledging the difficulty of the choice before them and expressing genuine sympathy for species forced to decide between transformation and extinction. He explained that humanity had faced the same terrible decision 3 years ago when they first detected signals from the ancient enemy. The process of becoming something beyond their original nature had been painful and frightening, but it was the only path to survival. Rivers gestured and holographic displays filled the chamber with images of human worlds during the early stages of integration. The scenes showed volunteers entering transformation chambers that looked more like medical facilities than military installations. Men and women emerged from the process looking essentially human, but carrying themselves with new confidence and awareness that marked them as fundamentally changed. The displays showed integrated humans working alongside partially transformed machines to build a new generation of defensive systems. Ships grew in orbital facilities like living things, while weapon systems evolved through directed mutation rather than traditional engineering. The boundary between organic and artificial intelligence had dissolved in favor of hybrid consciousness that combined the best aspects of both approaches. More disturbing to many delegates were the images of human children born after the integration process began. These new humans appeared normal at first glance, but possessed abilities that their parents had needed technological enhancement to achieve. They could communicate through direct mental contact and seemed to understand advanced mathematics and physics through pure intuition rather than formal education. The Valerian war chief stood up with his hand on his ceremonial weapon and declared that his people would never submit to such violations of natural law. He spoke passionately about the importance of remaining true to the forms that the gods had given each species, and insisted that death with honor was preferable to survival as monsters. His words carried the weight of ancient tradition and cultural values that had guided his people for thousands of years. Several other delegates nodded in agreement and voiced similar concerns about losing their essential nature in exchange for mere survival. The Altrian defense minister pointed out that the human children in the displays looked more like alien hybrids than members of their original species. She questioned whether being so fundamentally changed could still be considered human in any meaningful sense. Rivers listened to the objections with patience and understanding before responding with quiet conviction. He admitted that integration did change people in ways that could never be reversed, but insisted that the core of what made each species unique remained intact. Humans who had undergone the process were still recognizably human in their values and emotions, even if their physical and mental capabilities had been enhanced beyond original limits. The human commander explained that the transformation was not about becoming less human, but about becoming more than human, while retaining everything that made humanity valuable. The process enhanced existing qualities rather than replacing them with something entirely alien. Love and compassion and creativity were all strengthened by integration rather than diminished or destroyed. The debate continued for hours as delegates struggled with philosophical questions that had no easy answers. What did it mean to be truly alive, and how much change could a species accept while remaining essentially themselves? The purists insisted that any modification was a betrayal of their ancestors, while the integrationists argued that refusing to evolve was a betrayal of their descendants. The turning point came when Chancellor Brix asked Rivers to address the practical timeline for implementing integration technology across multiple species. The human commander's response sent chills through the chamber as he explained that the window for preparation was closing rapidly. Ancient installations throughout the galaxy were awakening and sending signals toward the spaces between stars where the main Devourer fleet waited in eternal hunger. Rivers displayed star charts showing energy signatures detected from the galactic core and dozens of outlying systems. The patterns matched those found in the ruins of civilizations destroyed in previous cycles and indicated that the enemy was already beginning to stir. The full invasion might be 50 years away, but advanced scouts would arrive much sooner to prepare the way for the consuming darkness. The vote was called after 16 hours of continuous debate, and the chamber fell silent as delegates made their final choices. The electronic tally displayed on screens throughout Nexus Prime showed a decision that would shape the future of galactic civilization. By a margin of just 7 votes, the Confederation agreed to begin immediate implementation of integration technology for volunteer populations. The aftermath of the vote saw the galaxy split along ideological lines that cut across traditional species boundaries. Some worlds, like the Merchant Guild territories, embraced integration enthusiastically and began converting their entire populations within months. Others, like the Valerian Empire, sealed their borders and prepared to face the coming darkness with conventional weapons and traditional courage. Most species fell somewhere between the extremes and established volunteer programs that allowed individuals to choose their own paths. Integration centers were built in neutral space where beings from any world could undergo the transformation process regardless of their government's official position. The galaxy became a patchwork of integrated and traditional populations preparing for war in their own ways. Rivers supervised the construction of training facilities and provided human instructors to guide other species through the integration process. The results varied dramatically as each alien physiology responded differently to the merger of organic and artificial systems. Some species adapted easily and gained abilities that surpassed even human achievements, while others struggled with transformations that left them barely recognizable as their original forms. The JÖRMUNGANDR became the flagship of a growing fleet of integrated vessels crewed by volunteers from dozens of different worlds. The ships bore the characteristics of their builders, but shared common features that marked them as products of the new hybrid technology. Hulls that flowed like living tissue and weapon systems that manipulated space itself became the standard tools of the Galactic Defense Force. Years passed as the galaxy prepared for a war unlike any in recorded history. Traditional military academies taught conventional tactics alongside integration procedures, while research stations developed new forms of hybrid consciousness that could operate across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The old boundaries between species began to blur as integrated beings found they had more in common with each other than with their unmodified ancestors. The first major test came when a Devourer probe ship entered the Outer Rim systems and began consuming the consciousness of entire planets. The integrated fleet responded with vessels that could match the enemy's ability to exist partially outside normal reality. The battle was fierce and costly, but ended with the alien threat destroyed and the affected worlds restored to normal space. Rivers stood on the bridge of the JÖRMUNGANDR as reports came in from across the galaxy. Integration centers were operating at full capacity, while volunteer fleets trained for battles that would determine whether consciousness itself had a future among the stars. The process was far from complete, and many worlds remained vulnerable, but the foundation had been laid for resistance that could actually succeed. The galaxy had chosen transformation over extinction and evolution over stagnation. Species that had spent millennia as enemies now worked together as partners in a struggle that transcended all previous conflicts. The old order was ending, but something new and potentially greater was taking its place. In the depths of space between galaxies, ancient intelligences stirred and began their slow journey toward a galaxy that had learned to fight back. The war for the survival of consciousness was about to begin, and the outcome would echo through the cosmos for millions of years to come. The JÖRMUNGANDR and its sister ships waited patiently for the darkness to arrive, knowing they were no longer alone in their vigil against the consuming void.